Hey there. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome back. It's another Red Pill Religion podcast. Red Pill Religion, where we say you are not a free thinker if you auto dismiss ideas. We have a right to think for ourselves always. So please support our work on redpillreligion.com. Redpillreligion.com, where in these days of social media censorship, yes, we're on our third channel now due to harassment, but we're still here and we're trying to clean up our act and be even nicer and see if we can get past the YouTube censors. But anytime we could get taken out, and if we are, remember, you can always find us on redpillreligion.com. We're on other social media platforms too, but redpillreligion.com is probably our safest. We're pretty sure that we've had multiple attempts to take that domain out and take that website out, and nobody's ever succeeded. So we could also use your financial support as well as spiritual. They're on redpillreligion.com. And here in the low bar on YouTube, find our links to our PayPal, Bitcoin, and maker support donation jars. We're still hanging on for the bitter enders on Patreon and hoping to get on Subscribe Stars soon. Bitcoin and PayPal are especially appreciated, especially Bitcoin, because, man, PayPal has been questionable and scaring people, and Patreon is scary. Anyway, those of you who help, we really help us. We really appreciate it. We post articles every day and new videos every day, sometimes by us and sometimes by others, and original articles and artwork too. So just come by and be part of our community. Please join our free Discord chat room if you want to join us to talk about video games, politics, nerd stuff. All from a red pill perspective, where we're mostly, but not all, Christians of some kind of orthodox persuasion. We like to call it little old orthodox, but also we hang out with pagans, Jews, Muslims, and anybody else who likes talking about this stuff. Now, also, please find us on Minds.com at Red Pill Religion. Find us on Gab.com at Red Pill Religion. Find us on Facebook at Red Pill Religion. And help us get the word out. We are growing. Let's see how fast we can get to 200, then 500, then 1,000 subscribers here on YouTube. Give us a like, give us a subscribe, hit that bell, and tell your friends or enemies. Okay, so tonight we've got a fun stream planned. I always love topics like this. People are afraid of talking about topics like this, but we are going to be unafraid to talk about topics like this, and in a completely open-minded manner, which means nobody has to defend their point of view and nobody has to come to an ultimate conclusion. We will be discussing the ideas here, and we're going to be discussing things like Bigfoot, Sasquatch, giants, and various theories as to what they may be, entertaining the very serious likelihood, in my view, that there's something to them. Joining me tonight is our friend Eric. Say hi to everybody, Eric.
Hey, what's going on, everyone? Thanks for having me on, Max.
Yeah, you've had an interest on and off in various paranormal and supernatural stuff for years, right? But you're not really committed to any one ideological point of view on these things.
Right. I'm just keeping an open mind, so.
And also our good friend Austin is also joining us. And Austin, I understand that you're coming in at mostly, your biggest interest of all is in Sasquatch/Bigfoot, right? You got to unmute yourself to talk, or I will unmute you. Yeah, you'll have to unmute yourself there, Austin.
Oh, I am so sorry. Yeah, that's my forte, Bigfoot and Sasquatch.
All right. Now, Bigfoot, when we look at Wikipedia, which is a source I do not trust or like, by the way, but I will bring up the Wikipedia entry because we'll start with Bigfoot because you have been wanting to do a Bigfoot show for a while, and I do want to focus on that. And then we're going to kind of dial out from Bigfoot to what I consider related topics. So if you look on Wikipedia, you'll see there's an article here on Bigfoot, also known as Sasquatch. And the Wikipedia entry will more or less say it's fake, it's hoax, there's nothing to it, it's dumb legends. It'll give a little credence to, a few things. You don't even get any really good photographs or newspaper articles or anything like that. And that, by the way, I will say, as someone I've been a Wikipedia editor for well over 10 years, maybe more like 15. And Wikipedia stinks. It's full of ideologues all over the place on multiple topics, and it is controlled by corrupt interests all over the place. You can't really trust it. And so the Wikipedia article isn't going to tell you much, but I mean, if you never heard of Bigfoot before, or don't know much, I guess you can start there. What's more interesting, and we'll get to this later, is that here's an article that I've mentioned, or that I've linked. It's in the low bar. It'll be on the blog and on Minds and such. Here's an article from, alleging that the Smithsonian Institute has admitted to the destructions of giant human skeletons that it found in the early 1900s. And we're going to talk about giants a little bit more too, but there's a lot of old newspaper articles which are very authentic seeming and which allude to people believing in giants. And some people believe Bigfoot is related to giants. Scientific American has an article you can read. Actually, Scientific American is taking it somewhat seriously. Look at this is by Dr. Marguerite Holloway, and you can see it's titled "Sasquatch is Just a Legend," right? According to the evidence, maybe not, argues Jeffrey Meldrum, a position he holds despite ostracism from his fellow anthropologists and university colleagues. In fact, there are serious people who think the Bigfoot exists. Now, I can tell you that even 3 years ago, I was still skeptical about Bigfoot and Sasquatch. In fact, I was more skeptical of like Bigfoot, Sasquatch than I was of ghosts, both because of personal experience and because I have always felt it unlikely that Bigfoot could exist if Bigfoot is just an animal. And you can defend, and this is where I was 3 years ago. I've kind of really changed my attitude in a lot of ways. But I'll just say, I'll start out with the skeptic's position with you, Austin. You think there's something to Bigfoot, Sasquatch. My opening volley to you is going to say, dude, I don't think I can believe you just because, it's been so many decades by now. If Bigfoot is some kind of, ape-like hominid, we should have skeletons. We should have dead carcasses. Somebody should be finding a whole or partial body that's been eaten by mountain lions or bears. Come on, man. How could we not have found Sasquatch? What would your answer to that objection be? Do you think?
Yeah, so that's actually a really good question. The first thing is to talk about the types of evidences that we do have. Now, like most things that we do here, legends or stories, we always have eyewitnesses. We have legends and stories, especially being native, or I guess being special to North America. There's really a history around Bigfoot that North America has that not a lot of other countries do. I mean, it's so unique. Then we'll move on. Okay, what about evidence of bones and whatnot? Well, let's argue on that factor. That we, even as paleontologists, explore, just because the way weather factors into corrosion and decomposition, we approximately, dinosaurs had a 1 in 3 billion chance of their bones being found. To give you a perspective here. And so when do we go out in the woods and do we see, grizzly bear bones? Do we see, you might see the occasional deer bone, but that's probably because of their high population. But the bone argument is not sufficient because we don't see most of the flora and fauna's decomposition evidently. One needs to really go out and search for that.
Okay, now I'm going to argue with you a little bit because I'm not a real woodsman. Okay, but I have spent time in the woods with family who are hunters. I was never into it, but I've done it. And I've gone out on nature trails and stuff, and I've found the occasional raccoon carcass or deer carcass, and so I don't, and I would expect. I mean, hikers find these things now and then, and furthermore, hunters go really all over the place looking for bears and looking for elk and looking for moose, and that's just my biggest argument. Like, why hadn't anybody accidentally killed one of these things yet?
Well, many claim they have. We'll just actually take your contention here of talking about hunters that go in deep into the forest. Now, hunters look for the animal themselves. Rarely do hunters go out into the woods and find the bones of what they're trying to hunt. They'll find, obviously, maybe some things that they had recently ate. Even some bone nests are a good example. But the probability, and just example, if you ask how many hunters can find bear bones while they're searching for bear, it's just not that practical. We also have to take in mind if you want to speculate, the population of how these things are present within a certain closed off area. And if you want my opinion on it, They do not have a big population within the North America. My estimate is that whenever there is I guess, a Bigfoot Sasquatch presence, it's going to be in family groups, not large tribes by any means. So this could mean, I mean, maximum 10 within within a 50 to 100 square foot radius.
Okay, so let me push back on my own skepticism now, and entertain the possibility that these exist as natural creatures, and that they're just hard to find, or maybe people have found things and they didn't know what they found. Like you said, it all eventually decomposes and or gets eaten or whatever in nature, and there aren't that many professional Bigfoot hunters. And if these things normally avoid humans, and here's the biggest thing. By far, I know one thing that has happened to us. It's been in my lifetime. It's like more intense now because everybody's online and focused on their computer screens and looking at maps. We lose a sense of scale. The United States and Canada are way bigger than people think they are. And like Bigfoot, Sasquatch is normally associated with like Oregon, Washington, British Columbia kind of thing. That is an enormous amount of land. I don't think people, I don't know, I wish I had an illustration to put on the screen, but let me put it to you this way. You could put the entire population of the United States in that territory, the entire current population of the United States in that territory, and still not be all that crowded.
Oh yeah, that's another big argument is that.
And
sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah. Well, just to finish, really, there's way more open space than people think. Way more open space than people think. Development where humans are tends to be very concentrated in real specific regions, and there's still all sorts of. Because I've traveled around, there's all sorts of places where there's no humans for miles and miles and miles around, and people will say, well, satellite footage and stuff, but the satellite photos and stuff just give you a distorted view of how small things really are or how big things really are. And it's not like the satellite photos are going to find Sasquatch. So go ahead.
Yeah, like you said, just the sheer amount of, I guess, immigration patterns. Now, it's funny that you mentioned this because a lot of the early settlers into America, and I'm specifically talking about colonial ones, the ones that were actually having to explore the majority of America and trucking on, report seeing these big hairy men. This is a huge thing. A huge point of argument is the reason why we don't see these things as much as we used to, or etc., has a lot to do with how we as humans now live. We live in very steady areas where, like you said, if there's growth, then the growth is slow and it's concentrated. By the time that someone would be done clearing a forest, I mean, they'd take months to do it, and I guess all the animals, or not all of them, but most of the animals in that area would have already left way long ago.
Good point. Now, I'm going to ask you to double check, close the door of your room or something, because we hear someone doing dishes or something.
Yeah, that's my wife, but the way my computer is set is I can't leave the living room.
It's all right, man. Now, I'm going to change subjects, though, to Eric, because I also believe that if we're going to entertain the idea that Sasquatch, Bigfoot exists, we have to mention that he has cousins that appear to be much like him, reported in a creature called Wendigo. Wendigo, found in large parts of Canada, that would possibly be a cousin of some sort or a related species of animal. And we also have reports of something called the Yeti up in the Andes in Asia, which seems to match some of the characters and descriptions of Sasquatch and Wendigo. They're not identical, they're not the same, and the legends vary, but they all appear to be, reports of a giant, hairy, bipedal ape man that comes and goes and is very shy of humans, but can get, violent, and then tends to come out of nowhere when humans encounter them, and then they run. And so there's reason to think there's more than one species of these. And that leads to the topic that Eric came to talk about too, I contend, because there are people who very seriously believe the giants have existed. And you will hear that giants are impossible. If you go look at the cheesy skeptic sites and stuff like that, they'll try to claim that giants are impossible because a human being who was as tall as like 9 feet tall would actually, human bone and human muscle would collapse. Like human beings who've grown freakishly tall, much over 7 foot, they actually start to develop health problems, especially as they get up to about 8 feet or over 8 feet. They tend to be very weak. They suffer from weak hearts because their hearts, the human heart can't handle the pressure, the whole, and the bones and the muscle literally can't stand the weight of being so large. And so humans who grow to what we would call giants are near impossible. The problem with that line of reasoning is it presumes that a giant is basically just a large human, as opposed to a creature that looks humanoid or is maybe related or not to humans, but is not made of, its bones can be denser and maybe have other stronger materials in it, maybe like boron or just a lot more calcium, whatever. I mean, some animals have much thicker, stronger, denser bones. And so that's out the window if giants are a separate species. And that brings us, so Eric, what do you think? You gave us some records and you've given us a couple of books that interest you, like the Encyclopedia of Ancient Giants in North America and Giants on Record. So tell us your thoughts on this subject, and frankly, whether or not you think Bigfoot might be related or completely unrelated to the topic. I would think they can't not be at all related if they're both real.
Right. I don't see any conflict at all with Bigfoot and giants. I think it's very possible that they could be related somehow.
Especially because you sometimes hear stories of big, hairy giants.
That's right. And as Austin pointed out, you do have stories and legends from various Native American tribes who talk about either the same or very similar creatures. Their descriptions are pretty much the same all across the board. And not only from the natives, but you also have the same stories and legends from early European settlers as well. So when you have two completely separate groups of people, and they come from very different cultural backgrounds, talking about the same exact thing pretty much, I would say that's even further evidence that that something, at least something like giants or Bigfoot, exists.
You good, Max? Oh, I don't know. Maybe he.
I apologize. I got on mute. I thought I was unmuted. So here I'm going to mention something here that I think relates to both of these things. There's a little video here you can that I'm playing a little bit of from a channel called Mystery History, which has interesting stuff on it, and it talks about the Smithsonian Museum and things that were once known to have been in the Smithsonian Museum that the Smithsonian Museum just kind of acts like were never there before. And if you start doing a little investigating, you will find that there are stories of the Smithsonian having things like this and now denying having them or that they ever existed. And there are people who have said that they have found things in this area of cryptozoology, of giants, of things like that, and claim that people from the Smithsonian Institute show up, take whatever they found, and are never seen again. I mean, and it's never seen or heard from again. And they're like, "What? We don't know what you're talking about." So call it kooky conspiracy theory if you want. Again, I've learned the hard way. Just don't make fun of people. Just the word conspiracy theory is like a conversation stopper. It's a thought terminator.
It's a very convenient way out of having a discussion about something serious. I think it's very anti-intellectual as well. If you can just dismiss something out of hand and say, well, it's just a conspiracy theory. Okay, well, that requires no serious thought behind that at all, does it?
No, like I said, you're not being a free thinker. A lot of people call themselves free thinkers, but this is a way of stopping thought. That's just a crazy conspiracy theory. Really? So what? You think conspiracies never happen? You think government and academia never lie about anything? You think people with money or weird ideological ideas never, collude to deceive the public? Really? You think those things? Yeah, no. I mean, what I find most interesting, and you're not the only person to bring this to me. We got another friend. I've had a few people tell me that a couple of people tell me that their dads have collections of old newspaper articles like these ones you're showing me here that they keep like in their, in a trunk in the attic or kind of thing or whatever. Old newspaper stories, it's serious newspaper stories in places like the New York Times in the 1800s and stuff, just very seriously and routinely, not sensationalist, just like, oh, recently discovered of these two very giants, these tall skeletons discovered, etc. These are all screenshots from the New York Times, and things like the San Antonio Express and a bunch of other local papers all over the world from the 1800s and the early 1900s. And nobody's come back and debunked these. They simply claim like there is no evidence of giants and nothing has ever happened. And there is no evidence of Sasquatch, Yeti, Wendigo. There's no evidence of any of that. None of that exists. Mm-hmm. And here we have pictures of stuff. We got reports from the past that were pretty serious about what they were talking about.
At one point, the Smithsonian was more, I want to say, transparent about these sort of things. Back in the mid to late 1800s, they would publish a lot of those articles you're seeing in the newspapers there themselves. But they don't anymore, and a lot of them, I think maybe even all of them, have been pulled from the public eye, and that's very interesting to me, because I think that's further evidence that something is being potentially covered up there. And I have a few theories on that, but I don't know if you want to get into that now or later. You're muted, Max.
I keep doing that. I so apologize.
Oh, it's the boomer in you. That's why.
I am not a boomer. I am Generation X.
Stop, brother, it's okay. Just take the Zoomer.
Generation X still exists. We're the forgotten generation. Anyway, yeah. What the thing is that, first off, one explanation is simple stubbornness on the part of the scientific establishment, but that doesn't explain it all. I think what goes further is I really do think there's an ideological fog that has taken over our media, our education system, and people kind of we are indoctrinated with this narrative that everything important in science is already pretty much discovered. All the important questions of life have been answered. The supposed God of the gaps has been eliminated. God, that's a joke, on multiple levels. And there's nothing much new to discover except minutia or stuff way out in distant space that no one can get to. That's like a narrative that's being sold, I think, to just kill people's imaginations. I really do. And that I think there is definitely a supernatural and paranormal element to the world, and that there's people who don't want us to think that way. I give you a site that kind of goes into what I would say the three broad categories are, other than ideology. Here's a pretty cool page that you might want to check out, especially Austin, Sasquatch Syndicate. Now, I cannot, vouch for how good this is, but I found it, and it's already there. And it looks like a site that hits the three main points. On something like Sasquatch, there is the scientific theory and what we would call natural science evidence that a creature like Sasquatch might exist. And they've got a lot of information that looks at it strictly from that point of view. But I think, again, if we're being open-minded, if you explore, there's also the paranormal theory. and that is that creatures like Wendigo, Yeti, Sasquatch, and these may not be entirely natural. That is, that creatures like this might potentially come from other dimensions, or be related to demonic or other spirit forces that only sometimes take physical form and then phase out of physical form. And then there is also the theory that creatures like this are really not from this world at all, that they are related to aliens who visited us. And there's a whole, wing of thought out there who I don't think they're correct, but I refuse to call anybody stupid anymore just for being interested in these things, that think, that there's dozens of species of aliens regularly visiting the planet, and that a lot of them look human, and that some of them may look like things like Bigfoot, or some of them may be giants, and that aliens may explain some of these things. I'll tell a story, and then maybe I'll invite anybody else if they have a story. A friend of mine, who shall remain nameless, but he's a very respected and seasoned attorney. He's about my age. He's completely sober and doesn't tell this story publicly. At least, but he'll tell friends. He lives out in Oregon, out in the woods, in a community, and he says not only has he encountered Bigfoot, but multiple people in the area have encountered Bigfoot, and most people who live there just openly believe that Sasquatch is real in some sense. His own encounter and the encounter of others, in my mind, often take on a spiritual dimension, like basically this big hairy force. Like his story was this big hairy force came out of nowhere outside, and they couldn't really see anything clearly, but it roared and shook and rattled the whole house, and they saw it moving, and then it was gone. And it weren't no truck, and it weren't no bear. But the fact that Bigfoot often appears and vanishes like that does lead many to think that Bigfoot is not entirely physical, or that he comes in and out of physical reality, that he does have a spiritual element. I am not asserting this. I am saying this is a theory. What do you think of stuff like that, Austin? I think you said you had a story you might want to tell.
Yeah, well, okay. And like you said, I can be honest about this. I don't think Bigfoot is in any way spiritual, and I don't want to laugh at people who think that, but to me, a hairy ghost or a hairy alien with low IQ to stay in a forest and then not accomplish anything with his life, I don't know, it just doesn't seem like it has many goals, I guess, going for it. Where I stand with this is this, to put it in perspective. When Europeans explored Africa, they had been told by the local people about a creature that lives in the mountains, and that was like a man, like a hairy man, like a massive hairy man. And they're like, okay, this is it had been legend for at least a couple decades or more, even a century. And they finally found it. And you want to know what that was? That was the mountain gorilla. They found that in 1902, to just give you some perspective. Sure. Yeah, when it comes to discovering species, people have an idea of what's going on in their area, but to actually find these types of things that are quote unquote legends are really hard. Now, I think I've had an encounter with unknown things, but here's a real spooky thing. Now, I had been looking into apes, Bigfoot, and all that for a while. There was an area, especially because I went on bfro.net, which is essentially a compilation of all these Bigfoot reports, and they update daily. So all the way back from the 1960s to 2018 or 19, I guess. And so I was like, hey, let's kind of look at a concentration that's not too far, to the point where I don't have to drive like 6 hours away. Well, there was this almost like this I triangulated kind of 3 sightings and then made a triangle in that area. And I was like, hey, let's go check out here with my buddy. And I have pictures of this, by the way, so I can send you these after the show even. And so we went there, obviously, with Bigfoot on the brain. And that's something you're going to have to admit. When you go, trying to find Bigfoot, the most thing you're going to find is what you think is Bigfoot because you're there to find Bigfoot. Well, that was not our experience by any means. So when we no, we were looking for Bigfoot, but what we experienced was just insane. And I'll elaborate. So we went out to this massive forest area, and this is not a place where there's walking paths. This is not your your suburban forest where you can get there with even a dirt roads. There's no dirt roads or trails that go through this forest. It's just 100% wood line. Well, we go pretty at least a 1/2 mile into this wood line, and we just wait. Do the typical wood knocks. We didn't do any calls or something. I thought that was kind of silly, but we did wood knocks and we just waited, and we did something. We did this for 2 hours, and nothing happened. So we were kind of like, okay. But what we saw when we turned on the lights, because we had our headlamps off, what we saw when we turned on our headlamps was all these structures that were so weird. And I'm not talking about like man-made looking structures. I'm talking about snapped trees where you could tell they were not cut off by like an axe or a saw, and they're trees just hanging in weird places. I have pictures of this stuff. There was like a 9-foot stump, and a heavy freaking thing, by the way, just like wedged between two other trees. Weird stuff, man. And so that kind of was like, whoa. So we got pictures of that. And then when we started leaving, because I mean,
you should have brought those to share. But okay,
you know what? What I can do is I'll just show you guys after. But yeah, it's pretty insane. And then so we started.
If you let us.
Yeah, okay. Sure, of course. So when we start leaving, I mean, because we really didn't experience anything. It was kind of a letdown. We turned on those headlamps, like I said, and we got 2 glowing eyes. Now, obviously, if you know anything about the flora and fauna, deer's eyes glow. Lots of animals' eyes reflect when there is light. This is not something that freaked us out, but what the eyes were doing, it was insane. So I'm probably with my buddy, maybe 50 feet from these pair of glowing eyes. Now the eyes were swaying back and forth, almost like somebody's kind of moving their head side to side. It was just really weird. But get this, it does this for like 3 minutes straight. Me and my buddy both see this thing with the eyes that's just moving back and forth. And we're like, what the frick? Now, the best part about this was like, okay, if we can have our light on these eyes, we know where to not walk. We'll stay far from the path of whatever this thing is. Well, of course, right? The eyes disappear. Of course, the shine disappears. And so we kind of freak out, and we're just trying to find our way back, making sure that we don't, run into whatever this thing is. So we have, I'm carrying a gun, and then we got like a few axes and stuff. We finally make it back. But the weirdest part about this story is that I wrote an email to the Department of Natural Resources, the DNR, about kind of like, hey, this kind of happened to me. I saw the tree structures, and then the eyes and whatnot. And this is what I got back as the email. Essentially, it was like this. Hey, yes, you're right. There's, we don't really get much traffic in the woods. There's no Boy Scouts or anything. So as far as the trees and stuff, it could be, wind that knocks down trees, or just natural causing structures. But then when he typed on about the eyes, he said, that's odd. There's a lot of animals, obviously, that reflect eyes, but that behavior that you talk about, that swaying eyes is an ape-like behavior, but we don't have apes in this area. And I'm like, what the oh my gosh. So that freaked me out. And so, yeah, that's my experience. Yeah, I don't know. Take it as you will.
Well, I'll tell you what, I don't want to put him on the spot, and if I misremember, just tell me to shut up, Eric. But didn't you say you had an encounter with a creature like Sasquatch sort of thing, or was that somebody else?
No, yeah, that was me. Yeah, I can retell it if you want.
I would
'Cause
love to hear it if you don't mind. I mean, you've told other stories. You don't have to be embarrassed.
Sure. Yeah. So I used to live on the other side of town, um, where I am now, and it was a very woodsy area.
Is it okay to say what general region of the country?
Oh
Like,
yeah. I'm on the East Coast over in Massachusetts.
okay.
So yeah, it was a very dense, woodsy sort of area over there. And where we lived was there was the nearest house or the nearest neighbor from us was like man, maybe half a mile or so down the street. Just to give you an idea, it was a fairly secluded area, and I used to go for walks all the time there because I love being out in nature. Um, and I was doing that one day, and this was a few years ago. And there was a golf course sort of like directly behind us. It was a private golf course. I shouldn't have been there legally, but uh, it caught my eye because it was sort of like across from it was like this shortcut into the woods, into where all the paths were, and you could hike them and whatnot. And so I was like, oh, I'm gonna walk through here because I'm lazy. I don't want to walk all the way around. That'll take like 20 minutes. And so I'm probably like halfway across this golf course, and out of the corner of my eye, I seen in my peripherals something big. I could tell it was big. It was sort of this like dark orangey brownish blur at first, but then when I turned to look at what exactly it was and focused on it, it was massive first and foremost, and it was like slightly hunched over and like running or doing some weird half run. It looked like a really big human, like a big muscly human with like, I don't know, a couple of fur coats on it. Right, and it was like running with a sort of limp, and it darted into the woods where I was originally going to head into, and that just totally terrified me. And so I was like, okay, forget that idea. And I instantly turned back around and headed back home. I think that was probably the fastest I've ever run my entire life, honestly. I just noped right out of there. I got home and I was out of breath, and my uncle was home at the time, and he's like, what happened? What's going on? And I was telling him what I seen, and he was like, oh, you've seen it too. And I was like, I was like, what? And he's like, yeah, no, listen. And he started telling me like he's seen it a couple of times because he was staying with us for a few years at the time. And I was like, oh wow, like that's crazy. And I was like, so like, okay, because at first I thought like was that a bear or was that like a moose? I don't know. Like whatever it was, though, it was bigger than me, and I felt very intimidated, so I got out of there. But we actually filed a report with the police, and get this, right? Because I'm thinking, we're gonna call them up and we're gonna tell them what happened, and they're just gonna be like, you people are crazy. Like, they're just gonna be like, yeah, probably a bear, probably a moose, don't worry about it. No, actually, while I was answering questions for the officer, he goes, yeah, these reports, they're more frequent than you would believe, actually, in this area. So I was like, oh, okay, cool. So I knew I wasn't crazy, and I knew I seen something, right, that other people clearly have seen as well. Now, do I think it was Bigfoot? I say potentially, because
Well,
see, that got me interested in like the Bigfoot topic, because I was like, well, what does this thing look like? And where are these areas where it's these sightings are most prominent? And it did fit a lot of the description. So you know what? Yeah, I think I may have very well seen a Bigfoot.
in the field of Sasquatchology, in which I have, of course, have my PhD. That's a joke. But I mean, in the field of Sasquatch lore, Massachusetts seems like a place where you don't hear. I mean, I've never heard of that there. I've heard it up in northern Canada. I've heard, and otherwise, Bigfoot in North America seems concentrated in the Pacific Northwest, which is the only fly in the ointment to your theory, but that doesn't mean it's not true. And furthermore, again, what were we talking about? Big hairy giants. So, I mean, no, again, why would I not believe you? What I find particularly telling is that the police were like not just eye rolling you and saying, "Go back to sleep, Grandpa." You know, have you been getting into the crazy? Have you been getting into the crazy weed again?
Yeah, they
just like no, we get this a lot.
Yeah, they didn't tell me to stop smoking the funny cigarettes. No.
You know, maybe if you had the funny cigarettes, you could entice Bigfoot out.
Yeah, I mean, I know. Put it this way: what I seen was it was definitely bipedal. It was definitely massive. It was definitely covered in dark orange, brownish fur, like you wouldn't believe, and it moved relatively fast. Whatever it was, but is like I said, I rarely went back to that area after I had that encounter, as you can probably understand why.
Oh, can I make a quick
Sure.
One thing I totally forgot about that happened to me and my wife when we went camping in Oklahoma. So like the Ozarks, Oklahoma, where there actually is a lot of Bigfoot stuff. But keep in mind, when we were out there, we were looking for land plots to buy. And because there's a nice mountain range out in southeastern Oklahoma, kind of the Ozark area. It's called it's in the Ouachita Forest, or I guess the Ouachita Mountains. And let me tell you, I had no clue about this place until I heard a podcast about it maybe a week ago. But everything they talked about makes so much sense. Yeah, and I kind of gave a background story. Me and my wife went out to Oklahoma to look at some land that we wanted to buy, possibly. Yeah, we were just camping out there, and so I didn't hear this is according to my wife, right? I was asleep. So my wife wakes me up at like 3 a.m. in the morning in the tent, and this is being there already a couple days. So everything has been normal until then. Just we've been camping outside in a tent for a couple days, and everything's been pretty good. We know there's mountain lions. We know there's black bears as well. But I was packing heat, so I wasn't really worried. Well, my wife wakes me up at like 3 in the morning, and she is like freaking out. She's like, "Hey, we need to go. We need to go." Like I hear something that and I'm like, there's animals outside. Like this is, like you're gonna hear a lot of things, and this is the first time. Keep in mind that she's gone camping in her life because. When you get a girl from the suburbs, they just don't really know anything about camping. And yeah, she's like, no, it wasn't like a normal animal. I'm like, what do you mean it wasn't like a normal animal? You know how many deer are out here? You know how many like other she's like, I can tell you right now that what I heard was was walking around the tent and was like coming back and forth and like poking and prod. I'm like, what do you mean? So I go out there.
And what part of the country is this, by the way, roughly in the region?
I told you, southeastern Oklahoma in the Ouachita Mountains.
I apologize. Go on.
Yeah, no worries. And I mean, that's a specific location. I don't care. It's not going to dox me. But yeah, and so I go out and outside of this the tent, and I'm just looking around with my my headlamp on, and I don't actually see anything, and I don't hear anything, but my wife was so scared out of her mind that we had to pack up everything, pack up our tent, and then we had to drive all the way back. Like she was so freaked out because something was doing this, and she said it was heavy, like it was dush, 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 like real heavy. I'm like, well, it could have been a bear, but when she talks about the poking and prodding at the tent, kind of like finger like, I'm like, yeah, I'm out of here. So yeah, I mean, this is 3 a.m. in the morning. We pack up our crap and we leave. We drive straight, out of the state. Yeah, I mean, just to give you some perspective.
Well, that would scare. If my wife said something like that happened,
yeah, I was just like on red alert after. I was like, "Are you serious?"
I'm like, no, we don't need. We do. No, hey, honey, Let's do like in the horror movies. I'm going to go out there and look for it. Yeah, right. No,
Right.
no, no.
Yeah. It's probably my native blood in me, but I would have, like, with the description you just gave, I immediately would have been like, yep, I was just almost eaten by a skinwalker.
Well, I'll tell you what. It's a little bit of a change of the subject, and I know, and it's perfectly fine to be resistant to supernatural or to adding a supernatural or paranormal component to these encounters. But I don't think we can just dismiss that idea. I'm going to have this up. I'm disappointed. I wanted to be able to link it for this show. Last week, I recorded a podcast with Jackson Thornton, a very popular wild man MGTOW. But a smart guy with his head on his shoulders, not an idiot. I'll tell a short version of the story, and then he said he'd let us mirror it here on Red Pill Religion. So in the next week or so, you'll see a copy of it on here. But I'll give you the brief story, and I want to hear more stories. If people in the audience have them and want to just leave us a comment here on YouTube or on the blog, or even, whatever, just tell us their stories. Nobody gets to laugh at you. Actually, if anybody comes in and laughs at your story, we will laugh at them and mock them for you. So if you want to tell a story and you're being sincere, I'm curious, because this story from Jackson was interesting. And the main reason you opened up to me is because I make it clear. I'm not going to laugh at somebody's story. I want to hear it. I don't have to draw a conclusion. I really don't. I'm open-minded. I'm curious. And his short story is he's worked for years as an oil guy, a contractor for the oil companies doing various work. And he'll tell it. You all get to hear it when I get the link up. But the short story is that, again, you're out in North Dakota, and you could be 25 miles in all directions from another human being in some of these locations where they have oil equipment. And, one of his jobs is just to drive out and check oil equipment. And it's all private property and owned by the oil companies. And he drove out one night to check the operation of some kind of oil thing, probably an automated drill, but I don't remember what he said it was. And long story short, he's there to check on the equipment, and he sees something moving, and he says in that time, he's a hunter just like you, Austin, and I got family hunters. I'm not a hunter, but I got family hunters. And he so of course everybody's armed in situations like that. You're out in the middle of nowhere, you better be armed. And he carries what amounts to a hand cannon with explosive tip bullets. But anyway, he says he gets out there, he sees something moving, and that time of year, black bears are native to the region, but they navigate south that time of year. So black bears are never found there. So it was probably not a black bear. It looks like something human. He gets out because it actually is his job. If somebody's there, they're trespassing and up to no good. So it's part of his job to, what are you doing here? And he because at first he thinks it's coyotes, but it looks human. So he gets out. He rounds to where he can see it clearly, and what he describes is a human male, looks like a human male, who is buck naked, completely naked, and has absolutely no skin anywhere on his body, hair, eyebrows. He's buck naked and can tell that he's male easily, and has no hair anywhere, and is chowing down on a dead coyote, eating a dead coyote. And he's like, whoa. And the guy looks up at him, and he gets that same glow that you were talking about, Austin, which is not it's just freaky. Sometimes animals, they'll get that orange glow back from lights or whatever. And that's a natural effect, even though it's creepy looking. But, it did that. He did that. The guy did that, looked up at him, and of course, scared the shit out of Austin. Excuse me for swearing. And Austin, says, "Okay, I'm drawing on you. Do not move, or I will shoot you."
His name's not Austin.
I'm sorry, Jackson. I am having a boomer night, aren't I? Jackson says, I do not move. I am drawing on you. I do not move, or I will shoot you. And the thing leapt up in the air, and Austin just instinctively shot him and plugged him center right in the chest.
Jackson.
Why do I keep saying Austin?
You know what? This is the dementia of the boomer zone.
I'm afraid
to
that
tune
it
in.
is.
Yeah.
I deny being a boomer. I still deny being a boomer.
Man.
I deny being a boomer. I just keep getting names bad. Yeah, Jackson. And plugged him in the chest. And long story short is that as a hunter, the guy rolled down, got hit and plastered and rolled down a hill, and Jackson went looking, saw the bone and the blood on the spoor from the damage he had done, and saw the direction the body went down, and he tracked it down, and he found where it looked like the guy should have fallen, but he was gone. And he went back up and found that all the blood, bone, and such that he had seen initially was also gone. But the dead coyote was there that had gouges through it, like something was clawing it. He could see from the footprints, they looked like barefoot human footprints, except that the toes obviously had claws digging into the ground. And he did call the cops, because it's like, if they find a body later, they'll call me a murderer. I got to get the cops out here. And the cops did an investigation, verified basically the details, that it looked like this was an incident, including the fact that there were barefoot human tracks, but with like claws sinking into the ground, and that there was no apparent body here. And Jackson got no reason to lie about this. He said it freaked him out, and he didn't know what it was. And they said the police didn't know either, but they sometimes get weird stories like this way out here in the wild, and would just make a note of it. And, if we find the body, we'll let you know. And, case closed. And he said he did investigation on the internet, and that bottom line is that the people who gave him the most plausible answers, he went to the local native tribes there in North Dakota, and they said, yeah, sounds like you got what's called a skinwalker there. And in skinwalker lore, these are basically what Christians would call undoubtedly demonic. But whichever spiritual tradition you're in, are basically dead people who've lost most of is like a partial soul of a dead person that was killed in a sort of traumatic way, and they're kind of like the soul of a person that's kind of a zombie, and he's kind of not aware that he's dead, but he's kind of not all there either, and they'll take up the skin of various animals and appear in various forms and then disappear. Which is the short summary of skinwalker lore. Now, that's a pure supernatural story. But why am I going to laugh at Jackson? He's not the only one who's seen something like that either. So I think my upshot on all of this is, one of the things I hate most today is that we've taught an entire generation of young people, that, especially young men who are naturally inquisitive, that there is nothing to be inquisitive about. There's nothing spiritual. There's nothing supernatural. There's no new worlds to explore. Maybe you can go into space or deep under the ocean, but you need millions and millions of dollars to do that. So really, you ought to just stay home and watch Neil deGrasse Tyson tell you what science is. And the world is a way bigger place than people think it is. And a lot goes on here. And it's like the whole educational and media establishments wants us to believe everything's been figured out by scientific naturalists. And it is simply not true. Even if you are a scientific naturalist, it's ridiculous. I mean, haven't you noticed they teach us science by telling us what we're not allowed to think about, because the questions have already been solved on anything, evolution, Big Bang, any of it. Like every important question has been answered. And if you really want to learn anything, you have to go get a PhD and spend years and years, and maybe you'll get to be able to do some research. The whole culture has got this idea that we're not supposed to be inquisitive. It's kind of sad, isn't it? That was my long rant.
Yeah.
Anyone support my rant? Can I get an amen?
You certainly can from me. Yeah, what you were just talking about there, this kind of goes back to the giants. I do have a theory about why the evidence for giants is not mainstream and is actively being suppressed, at least from what I can tell.
Hey, what is it?
Well, put it this way. Where would giants fit in on Darwinian evolution?
Well, they wouldn't. Well,
and,
they would. No, wait a minute. No, they would fit in as another species we haven't cataloged and are hiding the existence of or ignoring the existence of for somehow.
Now, yeah. Now here's because I get two responses to that question whenever I ask it, and they say, well, if we ever do find something like that, which we have, by the way, they'll say, well, it could be the missing link. It could be, as you said, just another species we haven't cataloged yet. But given the evidence that we have for giants, and I think they obviously existed, why hide that? Why hide it? Why destroy the evidence? Why not bring it to light in the mainstream sciences then? If it's the missing link, if it's an uncatalogued species, why not? Because that would be a pretty major breakthrough, right, in biology and all of that, wouldn't it?
Yeah, so what would the ideological reason be for suppressing it, besides just being hidebound and stubborn? Would there be I mean, I could think of several reasons, but what are you thinking?
I don't know. Maybe to discredit ancient sources which talk about these things, and they talk about them in a supernatural context. A lot of native tribes, for example, don't think that they were just big humans. They do think that there's more to these things. And
Giants are spiritual. That giants are creatures. Yes, some of the tales of giants include tales of them having what are clearly some kind of psychic or supernatural powers. Now, you can't. I don't endorse that or not endorse it. Let's go out into what I consider. Again, I am done making fun of people. I just do. I am. But I do consider. I think this guy is probably crazy. But he's got a very large following, and I could always be the crazy one. His name is David Wilcock. And he's got a lot of things to say on a lot of things. He's a little like David Icke, but more modern. David Icke doesn't like him. Am I saying that right? Well, anyway, but he's provocative. I watched a good bit of his material before I finally decided, no, I don't think I believe you, sir. But he's provocative, and he's got his fans, and he's not an idiot. And he's got an elaborate worldview in which basically, take it for whatever you want, that giants, that there are multiple races of giants, that there is some truth to the tale from the Book of Enoch, which is apocryphal and which most Orthodox and Catholic churches reject, but does hold that Nephilim were angels that fell, like after the original fall. These were a separate set of angels who fell and mated with humans and created a race of giants, and that they have an angelic origin. I don't believe it, but go ahead, explore that idea if you want to. And he goes even further because he believes there's something like 70 different alien races running around the world. In his universe, and a whole lot of alternative theory speculation stuff, the famous Roswell incident, and this does relate to what I'm going to get there, even to Sasquatch. The Roswell incident in the 1950s was real. That down in Antarctica, that basically contact was made formally with humans in the 50s and 60s, and that world governments now interact with these alien races down in Antarctica, which is why nobody can get down there, and that there are multiple races of beings that are giants, but they are aliens, and that they range anywhere from 10, 20 feet tall to, in some extreme cases, like 70 feet tall, which strains my credibility, but whatever. And that they're basically hidden, but there's war and conflicts between various races, and so some of these encounters people are having with giants allegedly may in fact be aliens. That is a theory. I'm not going to mock that theory. I'm going to say you are free to explore it. This is the one I'm most skeptical of. But you know what? I've been pie in the face so many times with things I used to be skeptical of that I know are true. It's just like, whatever, man. It's provocative theory. It's out there. So that the giants basically are aliens and are various races of aliens. And that supposedly in the 50s, by the way, the aliens agreed that they needed to not be interacting with humans anymore and would restrict their activities down to Antarctica. And that's where all of the humans interact with, governments interact with the aliens, giants. And and that any giant encounters you have from that point forward will be covered up by the government because they don't want you knowing about the aliens. And those are basically unauthorized encounters, creatures that got loose, or, you know, whatever. Now that's on the fringe, but it's out there. So there, I shared it. I dare you to make fun of me just for saying it's out there. I think interest in this stuff is going to be perennial, and I think only an idiot at this point believes that none of it is real. That's what I'd say to any of it. Does that sound fair? It would be dumb to think none of this has anything to it.
No, there's absolute truth, and what we've kind of all been poking at, and not so much me, but I'll even go on a tangent here. Is there is a slow progression of what the world wants you to think, and we kind of listed some examples, but to really just kind of really kind of put it in perspective, the 1975 Washington State Atlas had a dog it mentioned Bigfoot. It talked specifically about the species in which it inhabits the state. Another example, Teddy Roosevelt in his booking of adventures, the president talked about how he encountered face to face a Bigfoot. Like this is not fake stuff. This is stuff you can look up.
Why would Teddy Roosevelt make that up?
Yeah, why would the president he was notorious for exploring. He was notorious. This is what he did. He always on his horse.
Yeah, he went to Africa, went hunting for various animals there, and went hunting. Hunting was his passion, and he was a big game hunter.
So
why would he make up meeting a Sasquatch?
Exactly.
Just, why? He got everything else, I actually think that this is going to be an exploding area in general, this sort of thing. Even if we go back, go get down to earth and just assume that these creatures are just animals, or humans that are natural to this planet and they're just rare and hard to find. I think it's ridiculous to say we're not allowed to be curious about it, or that we're required to scoff at it. So that would be my sermonizing. Tell you what, we've been going about our hour, so we should close it up. Did anybody have any final thoughts they wanted to give, or did I just wrap that up pretty okay?
I got nothing.
Yeah, I've got nothing really other than
all right.
Look into this stuff with an open and objective mind, and to come to your own conclusions about things.
And be skeptical of people who call themselves skeptics, because there is no inherent honesty or coherence to skepticism. You can be skeptical of anything or anybody or for any reason at any time. Watch. Whenever you are skeptical, you are doing one of two things. You are deciding that what you already believe is true is still true. In other words, you're refusing to change your mind. You're just being skeptical because what you already think, you're not going to believe anything different until they prove it to you, or you're refusing to draw a conclusion. But you can be skeptical of the skeptic. You should be skeptical of your own motivation for being skeptical. Do you have a justified skepticism? Do you have a right, just because you're skeptical, to dismiss somebody else and think, shouldn't you think, even if you're skeptical, you might be wrong? Remember, don't let anybody bully you by calling himself a skeptic. Okay, tomorrow night we're doing Nerd Stream with Ray, where we're going to just have fun talking about comic books and manga and stuff. We're going to have an interview on Tuesday. I forget who, but we're going to be having an interview, probably a men's rights stream on Tuesday. John Wright will be in here on Wednesday. We're going to be interviewing a Catholic author on Thursday who recently published a book of traditional ancient Christian devotions. So we got stuff here every night. Please give us we are on our new channel, so again, please give us a like and a subscribe and hit that bell and tell your friends or enemies, especially anybody in the religious community who wants to help out someone who has had 3 years of harassment and abuse. But we're having a good time here on Red Pill Religion. So give us a like, give us a subscribe, and God bless everybody.